There's a courthouse in Gallia County, Ohio, that's seen the same scene play out 3 times. Not similar scenes, the same one. A minor, a much older partner, a marriage license issued, signed, filed away in a drawer somewhere, treated at the time as completely unremarkable paperwork. I want to start there today because I think once you actually lay out the timeline, not the summary version, the actual dates, something becomes hard to unsee. This isn't one uncomfortable footnote in the Siders case. It's a pattern. 3 separate marriages, 3 separate underage brides, spanning 6 years, all connected to the same extended family in the same rural Ohio county. Let's go back to 2002 first, because chronologically, this is where it actually starts. And I don't think most coverage of this case has spent enough time here. State records reviewed by the Columbus Dispatch show that in 2002 in Gallia County, a 14-year-old girl named Tessie Wright, pregnant at the time, married a 48-year-old man named Richard E. Siders. 14, pregnant, 48. I want to just sit with those 3 numbers for a second, because I think it's easy to read past them too fast when you're taking in a lot of information at once. A 48-year-old man is old enough to have a 14-year-old's grandparent as a peer, and somewhere in Gallia County, Ohio in 2002, that marriage was processed, approved, made legal. Tessie, later going by Tessie Siders, told the New York Times years afterward that her husband, who since passed away, was a cousin of Gary Siders Sr. That's the same Gary Siders Sr. now sitting in the middle of the child endangerment case that's made this family a household name across the country. Not a coincidence of surname. An actual blood relative, 3 generations connected, all touching the same pattern. Then, a year later, 2003, same county, it happens again. 15-year-old Virginia Siders married a man named Joshua Saunders. Records reviewed by the Dispatch confirm the marriage, the year, the county. According to information reviewed independently and shared publicly by someone with direct knowledge, Virginia is understood to be a daughter of Christina Siders, one of the 4 adults currently facing felony child endangerment charges in the case that's dominated headlines this month. I want to flag something important here, though, because I think it matters to be precise rather than definitive. That specific family connection, Virginia being Christina's daughter, hasn't been confirmed to me through a direct Columbus Dispatch statement the way the marriage record itself has. It's out there reported, but with slightly less certainty than the marriage date itself. So I'm treating it exactly that way. The marriage in 2003 is documented fact. The precise family tree connecting her to Christina is something I'm holding with a bit more caution. What isn't in question, though, is the pattern itself. 2 marriages 1 year apart, same county, same extended family, both involving 15-year-old girls or younger. And then 5 years after that, it happens a 3rd time. The one most people already know. In 2008, 15-year-old Elizabeth Russell married 18-year-old Gary Siders Jr. in Mason County, West Virginia, with her parents' consent. 2 months later, she gave birth to the first of what would eventually become 18 children over the next 17 years. 3 marriages, 3 underage brides, 1 extended family, spanning 2002 to 2008. And now in 2026, 4 adults from that same family sitting in jail, each facing 16 counts of felony child endangerment, over conditions authorities have described as some of the worst they've personally encountered. I don't think it's responsible to draw a straight line from, this family had a documented pattern of child marriage, to, and therefore this specific outcome was inevitable. That's too clean. Real families, even ones with genuinely troubling patterns, don't move in straight lines toward a single predictable endpoint. But I also don't think it's honest to treat these as 3 unconnected coincidences either. When the same courthouse processes the same basic transaction, a legal adult marrying a child, 3 separate times across 1 extended family within a 6-year window, that's not noise. That's a norm. Something that, inside that specific family and that specific community, apparently didn't trigger the alarm it should have. Here's where this actually connects to something bigger than just one family's history, though. And I think this is the part that deserves real attention, because it's not really about the Siders specifically anymore at this point. Ohio Department of Health records, reviewed by the Dispatch, show that between 2000 and 2024, At least 15 children under the age of 15 were legally married in the state of Ohio. 15 children under 15 years old. That includes 2 10-year-old girls married in 2017. I had to read that number twice when I first came across it. 10 years old, married legally in Ohio. In 2017, not some distant, unrecognizable past, less than a decade ago. Since the year 2000, more than 2,500 minors have married in Ohio total. And the overwhelming majority of them, 96%, married adults. Not other teenagers close to their own age. Adults. Ohio did eventually change its law, but not until 2019, and only after a Dayton Daily News investigation forced the issue into public view. The new law raised the minimum marriage age to 18, but it left something behind, a specific carve-out that still allows 17-year-olds to marry under certain circumstances. A gap deliberately built into otherwise protective legislation. 2 state senators, Bill Blessing, a Republican from Colleran Township, and Bill DeMora, a Columbus Democrat, introduced a bill this year specifically to close that remaining gap entirely. Blessing has pointed directly to the Vinton County case as evidence for why that gap actually matters, saying plainly that child marriage isn't some relic from another era. It has real current consequences, happening now, not decades ago. I think that's worth sitting with, honestly, because it reframes everything. The Siders family isn't some isolated anomaly that slipped through unnoticed. They're a specific, visible example of a much larger structural gap that Ohio's own legislature is currently trying, and so far struggling, to close. Ohio's Attorney General, Andy Wilson, the same official now helping prosecute the Siders case directly, has spoken publicly about this specific issue, separate from the criminal charges themselves. His reasoning was blunt, and I think worth quoting closely, because it's rare to hear an official state a position this directly rather than hedging around it. He said kids can't vote, they can't buy cigarettes, they can't buy alcohol, and he said he's generally not for young kids getting married either, adding that he wasn't sure why that even needed to be treated as some kind of cautious, careful position to hold. I don't think Wilson was speaking abstractly there. I think he was speaking with the Siders case sitting directly in front of him, informing exactly how directly he was willing to put that sentence together. Let's talk about what actually happens legislatively next, because I think it's easy to read a story like this and assume the reform effort is a sure thing, moving smoothly toward passage. It isn't actually. According to reporting on the bill's progress, the effort has lost some momentum recently, facing quiet opposition from certain state senators. Blessing has said publicly he still believes the bill will pass by December. That's his stated expectation, not a guarantee. Bills stall in state legislatures constantly for reasons that often have very little to do with the merits of the issue itself and everything to do with unrelated political friction. I want to be honest about something else too, because I think it's the harder, less satisfying part of this whole story. Even if that bill passes exactly as written, closing the 17-year-old carve-out entirely, it wouldn't retroactively change anything about what happened to Tessie Wright in 2002, or Virginia Siders in 2003, or Elizabeth Russell in 2008. Those marriages already happened. Those decisions were already made decades ago, inside a legal system that, at the time, actively permitted them. Reform closes a door going forward. It doesn't undo what already walked through it. That's the uncomfortable core of this story, I think. Not that one family did something uniquely monstrous in isolation. It's that this family's pattern was legally possible, 3 separate times in the exact state and county where it happened. And that pattern wasn't unique to them. 15 children under 15, married across Ohio over 2 decades. 2 of them only 10 years old. 96% of all those child marriages involving adult spouses. The Siders family didn't invent a loophole. They walked through one that was already there, already being used by thousands of other minors across the state, most of whom never ended up connected to a case anyone outside their own community ever heard about. I keep coming back to that number, 96%. Nearly every single minor who married in Ohio over the past 2.5 decades married an adult. Not a peer, an adult. That's not a handful of unusual, isolated exceptions. That's a pattern so consistent it starts to look less like individual bad decisions and more like a structural feature of how the law was written for a very long time in a state that only started seriously addressing it 7 years ago, and still hasn't fully closed the gap even now. Where does that leave the Siders case specifically sitting inside all of this? The 4 adults currently charged, Gary Siders Sr., Christina Siders, Gary Siders Jr., and Elizabeth Siders, have all pleaded not guilty to felony child endangerment. That case is still moving through Vinton County's grand jury process, separate entirely from these older marriage records, which involve different people, different decades, different specific legal proceedings that have already fully concluded under the laws that existed at the time. But the marriage history matters anyway, I think, because it shapes the environment those 4 adults and the 16 children eventually removed from that home were actually living inside. A family where a 15-year-old marrying an adult wasn't a scandal or a crisis. It was, apparently, simply what happens sometimes. Documented, legal, filed away in a courthouse drawer, 3 separate times, across 2 different decades, without anyone outside that family or that small rural community treating it as the kind of alarm bell it probably should have been. I don't think that explains everything about how this case ended the way it did. I don't think anything explains that fully yet. The investigation is still active. The grand jury process hasn't concluded, and a lot of what actually happened inside that specific house over those specific years is still being pieced together by people with far more access to the evidence than any of us watching from outside. What I do think the marriage records tell you is this: whatever normalized environment existed inside that family, by the time the 4 current defendants were building whatever their household eventually became, it wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the second. It was the 3rd documented instance of the exact same underlying pattern, stretching back over 2 decades inside one extended family in one small Ohio county that, until this year, most of the country had never heard of. We'll keep following this case as the grand jury process moves forward, and we'll bring you what's actually confirmed by court records and named sources, not speculation and not more than the documents themselves can actually support.